Welcome back. Welcome to Ship of a New Story, and we're broadcasting live from House of Story during Almedalen, and we're currently sitting in the Stockholm studio, placed more exactly in Sigtuna. Today's short session, is Meaningful Encounters Leaving Watermark for Life. Second session out of 3. And today with me in the studio, my name is Nick D, and I will be facilitating this session today. On my left hand side I have
Sunita Raut,
and on my right hand I have
Yes.
And with my lovely team, we will try to grasp and grapple a little bit with what is a meaningful encounter. The first session we checked in on and talked a little bit when we just get started, when you start a process, when you leave the harbour and you sail out in open seas. What happens? What is a meaningful encounter? Now, today's session is called Fair Winds. We're at it. When you're in a process and everything is kind of on the road, probably quite hectic, but you're involved in something, and you might even get very much observed with that. What then is a meaningful encounter? We spend endless hours on Zoom the last year, and eventually we might turn into zombies or zombies, and is that a meaningful encounter? How do we deal with the use of our time and people in today's time? So that is a little intro on today's topic. In a world on efficiency, is that always efficient to be efficient? How do we go about that? So with my friends in the studio here, I wanted to check in a little bit with also personal experience on what is a meaningful encounter, and maybe any advice that you would have on creating such. Can we actually do that? Can we be more mindful in creating meaningful encounters, or do they just happen? So anyone would like to start? Bo is raising a finger here.
Well, in the last session I was talking about when you are doing things together, that's how I feel you get meaningful encounters. That also gives a measure on the quality you can deliver to other people. But of course, do you always have to be useful in every sentence? Perhaps you should just be a human being instead of a human doing. Well, it's actually true. It should be most important to be a human being, because you have to have the value of being a person. But also, we noticed there, where if we didn't put things right, we wouldn't even have an encounter today. Certain things has to be in place and in time. And if you don't have certain circumstances done, it's very hard to concentrate on any kind of encounter at all, because there is certain circumstances that have to be fulfilled.
So you're kind of focusing a little bit now on a framework, a planned framework per se, for creating a meaningful encounter, and maybe versus the spontaneous. Now, we said that we're actually in the full process. We are at sales. Sunita, what is your first sort of initial little reflection on a meaningful encounter? Do we need to set the structure for that and help that along? And I just want to say that today we're talking both maybe from a personal sphere in our personal life, as well as professionally meaning a bit more maybe work-wise, whatever that work would then be, but those two realms. And as all the programs here we do with Ship of a New Story, we are looking at, with these meetings, whatever we do, how can we be best for the world, maybe rather than best in the world. That is just like a little base platform for those of you who are new here now to this session. Yeah, Sunita. Any reflections?
One of the questions that was asked both by Boo and and Nick here is, do we need to be planned and do we need to be structured to have a meaningful encounter? And I think before the plan and the structure, what comes for me at least, and what I have reflected on when I look at my life, is intention. I think it is the intention that really creates a structure, and the kind of structure that gets created by intention is very different from the kind of structure that gets created by plans. Because when you plan something, then you're really getting into the detail of things. But when you intend something, you are much more open to that which is coming towards you. So in one way, when you have an intention creating the structure and letting that plan things out, I think you are really open to the forces of the universe making things happen. Let me illustrate this with a story from my own life. In the year 2017, I had just closed one of the jobs I was doing, and I was absolutely sure that I don't want to work in that way. But I wasn't sure what is it that I would like to work with. And that's when I heard somebody talking about water. And later I learned that, he is the waterman of India, an extremely well-known person across the world, died by the name Dr. Rajendra Singh. When I heard him, I didn't know what I wanted, but I know I wanted exactly what he had. And I set the intention, and I continued to do nothing, because the only thing that made sense was working like him, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I set the intention of working like him. Now, as it would, and now we don't know whether this is something that the intention created or the universe but 6 months after that encounter, I actually had him on my flight. Mm-hmm. And I ran after him because I was so clear about, things, and said, this is what I've been trying to meet you for the past 6 months. And he said, what are you doing? And I said at that time, these days I'm doing nothing. Mm. And he said, if you're doing nothing, why don't you come and follow me and visit, these 400 people who are working with water, and why don't you give a speech to them? And that's how my journey with water started. And in fact, the fact that I'm sitting here is because that led to my meeting people from Initiatives of Change and working with water, and now I'm sitting here. Now, what would you call this? I think this is a great example of meaningful encounter. The fact that I'm sitting here is a great example of meaningful encounter, and it's because I set an intention of working in a certain way and always be open to that. But I didn't plan anything. I didn't structure anything. I set an intention, and I was true to that intention, to the T. Every time there was something that was aligned to the intention, I said yes, and when it was not aligned to the intention, I said I need to move away from here.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful example of intention as a way of creating meaningful encounters, whatever they may be. Now, you were saying that you were doing nothing, and we were saying we're at fair winds, and we're full into something, and it's quite fascinating that we can be fair winds full of doing nothing also. Because that's kind of part of life, is we're in the flow of things and we have an intention and see what happens when we try to navigate towards possibilities if we allow them to.
I think even the word nothing, if you think about it, it is because the narrative that we have of doing something is, if we have a plan, if we have a vision, if we have a structure, then we are doing something. When we're not doing that, we believe we are doing nothing. But the fact is that most of the meaningful things are happening in this space of nothing. When we believe we are doing nothing is when life is actually happening to us. If we were to be open to that, if we were to really change the narrative that we have about what is something and what is outside of this something, we would actually realize that lots and lots of things are happening in this space of nothing. The only reason we call it that and we judge it as nothing is happening, it's not effective, you're wasting your time, etc., is because that is the way we have been trained and educated to think. It is not how life is.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. In the way of how life is, you were mentioning here initiatives of change. Initiatives of change is both a partner in this broadcast right now, working with bridging gaps across divides, trying to, as the intention of Ship of a New Story, to work towards a better world for all. How do we become best for the world and not best in the world? And so I'm cutting back to you a little bit, Bo, here now. The within you were sort of mentioning the structured plan or creating things like what happens when you put nothingness into that, and also in order to create initiatives of change for the better, in my mind.
Well, the word nothing I don't have the same feeling about the word that you do, but I respect your view on this. But because I think the only time you are doing nothing as a human is when you are dead. Because otherwise you are doing a lot of things. The body is doing a lot. Right now we're sitting still. The heart is beating, the blood is flowing, our mind is going. But as I understand you, is that you don't always have to do the planning yourself. Maybe you are open to suggestions, and I think this is a nice way of seeing life, and I would like to live like that. But I remember Forrest Gump. Do you remember what he said? Life is a box full of chocolate. You never know what you're gonna get. And it's a nice word. It's the same time. You just open and it's gonna life is always gonna surprise you with chocolate. I don't like to sound cynical, but I don't think I always get chocolate everywhere, because sometimes it's you have to work hard to get something done. And if you have an intention, I totally agree with you with the idea of the intention. But after you have landed with your intention, which is very important, of course, it's the first thing. Things, for me, I cannot just sit and wait wait for the universe. Something should happen. There is nobody knocking on my door. I'm sorry, I wish it was. It was nobody calling, hello, I know you want to be a great movie star or you want to be a filmmaker. I have just the perfect. I heard stories, but that has happened to people. Never happened to me. But I think then you have to make some plans to take charge of your life, so you can actually move to the intention. And sometimes it's not just saying yes or no. It's creating the opportunities. That's my experience. That you have to make things happen. Mm-hmm. And of course you should not just be so focused so you're not open to other alternatives. But we have different experiences. This is my life. Your life sounds more fun, of course. But I haven't reached that.
Okay, I want just to take, because we're actually sending here during Almedalen, and Almedalen is really like a open source of political dialogue. I mean, sort of foundation of that. So if we politically, or if we want to be out there, if we want to make a change, how could we, on that arena, how could we advise or inspire to create meaningful encounters? And so if I know that you, on the one hand, you speak the same language and you have slightly different angles from it, but if you were to advise some of our politicians here steering towards a better good for everyone, for a world where we're best for the world, and by creating meaningful encounters, what would we say? What we should, and that goes for anyone. I mean, we're all we may not be professional politicians, but we all make our own decisions. What would you like to say, Sanita? Would you like to check in? Do you have any thoughts on that?
What would we say to the politicians? If we follow the same, follow the same line of thought that I was talking about, is to be really then be very intentional about what is it that you would like to achieve. One of the things that we notice about politicians, and I think one of the reasons that they also lose some of the followers that they have, is then they start to waver, and it seems to be more, I'm here to get the power, I'm here to get, rather than I'm here to really achieve, this particular thing. And I see a consistency. And I think if you look at some of the politicians and some of the political parties that are gaining right now, even in Sweden, as we're moving towards the election, these are people who are very clearly setting out their intentions and doing those things that are consistent with the intention, and moving away from those things which are not consistent to those intentions, making plans that are consistent to the intention. Because I think that is something that creates trustworthiness. That is something that creates, and isn't that what any political party wants? And isn't that what we want from the political leaders as well? That they be consistent with the intentions that they speak up to. That's what I have to say.
Great. Bo?
We are a very rich country. We had a good tradition of democracy for many, many years. And we have a good level of organization. We used to be one of the best countries in the world. And that was great. And
how were we the best countries in the world?
Yeah, in healthcare, in happiness index, and in also in economy, salaries and pensions. Not anymore. I'm sorry, and we didn't have much crime before either. Things has changed. And the first thing to realize that is actually have changed. Not to go blindfolded for the problems just because you feel a little responsible perhaps for the change and not taking any responsibility for the change. Okay, people make mistakes. Politicians do it very often, I think. And if you do, it's a good thing to correct it, because then you can still keep your pride, I think. But for me, I'm quite negative now how the development has been in Sweden. And what is the solution? Yeah, many have different ideas of that, and they do not cooperate very much because they put focus on a certain problem. Some put focus on the crime rate, some put focus on the environment, some put focus on the pandemic and the long lines in the sickness, healthcare. But we have to put a broader view to help along to actually fix the things that is not that good, because so far I think it's fixable. But I don't know if it's continue like this. Maybe we go to a certain point. Argentina, 100 years ago, was the richest, the most functioning country in the world. It's not anymore. And we should actually study Argentina, what went wrong there, to see the tendencies. Okay, I sound very negative.
Okay, thank you. Some food for thought. One thing I wanted to touch grounds with the two of you is as the name or the title for this session is also Meaningful Encounters Leaving Watermarks for Life. So that is kind of connected to meaningful encounters that we individually has had, which stayed with us, left a positive watermark. So I have a little more personal question to the two of you. I know I haven't prepared you for this one, but I'm just curious to see if you were to sort of look at your own experience, and also maybe Sunita, you have an Indian background, So you're kind of born and kind of bred within that system. Bo, you got a Swedish background, so sometimes we are part of our system and values or lifestyles and counters that might come with that. But back again then to watermarks. What could you kind of share with us a meeting you actually did when you once set an intention to meet this guy with a water project, but which is really a watermark if you look at that in that sense. But do you have any sort of meetings that pops up to you? So okay, wow, when I met that person, and was that actually something that was planned, or did it just happen?
And what would the meeting mean, you mean? If when I met that person, what was supposed to happen, you mean?
I'm just sort of saying that there's a saying that sometimes you, what is that? I'm trying to remember one of these memes, but sometimes you meet somebody very briefly and they will stay with you for life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you meet somebody or you live with somebody, but then when they're gone or they're within your knowledge, but then they didn't really make an imprint.
Someone you have shared every day with, and suddenly they are totally gone in your life.
True, yeah. And that can be super positive. But sometimes, we have people around us near that we might meet every day in school or at work, which doesn't make an impact. So what are those things when suddenly somebody has left a watermark in ourselves? And is there some encounters? I would say personally for me, I've actually had the privilege of meeting Dalai Lama 3 times in different contexts. And every single one of those has left me with a watermark. And I'm so fascinated by this person who is able to see the person, not the context. What was setting, what was the need of that person? He was seeing me. Or the things I was working for, where in this case, the setting, actually on one of the occasion, I actually did this piece of, he actually was here in Stockholm because he had received some kind of medal. And we were going to big time setting in town, and I was asked to make with my students to make a small production with the ceremony when this was going to get handed over, and I felt really embarrassed because as we were playing, he'd just been given all these diplomas, blah blah talks and money, and I did this little play, a little scene from Momo and the Fight of Time. And we only had this one little flower, and during my play we handed over this flower to Dalai Lama, and in his final speech he said, yeah, this money and this medal, that's fine, but this flower, now we're talking. And I just felt, they're going to kill me. Everyone there who met me, they're going to kill me. The only thing he talked about was this flower. And I thought, wow,
is it
cool.
possible to bribe Dalai Lama?
With a flower, yeah, maybe so. So in that sense, that really left me with a watermark. And I don't know if you have any sort of similar things like that when it's like, well, wow, okay, that was something.
Well, nothing as spectacular as meeting the Dalai Lama and he acknowledging your gift as the most precious one for that evening. But something that really changed the turn of my life was actually almost 24 years back now, my first encounter with Swedishness. So as you know, I'm Indian, and I was in India and I applied for a job with the Swedish company Ericsson. And during this interview, in the panel list, there was an Indian manager and there was a Swedish manager, and they were interviewing me. And I had an education in marketing, but I was applying for a job which was in competence development because I had done a little bit of it and I had a passion for it. Absolutely no education, but my heart was beating for training people and working with people. And in that moment when they were asking me, why do you want this job? You don't have an education in it. And I said, I just have a feeling that I will do so good in it because my heart is in this. And exactly in that moment, I saw that the Swedish person who was on the panel his face just lit up completely. And the person who was Indian, and this is not a criticism of the Indian culture, I think it's just saying the differences between the Indian and the Swedish culture. He got a little skeptical. And in that moment, I thought, I made a note to myself, maybe this is a fundamental difference between the Swedish and the Indian culture. The Swede is looking in the future and looking at that which is in the present and which is very, very alive in this woman. Whereas the Indian is saying, well, the past says she's educated in something else, and isn't she being very risky? And every time afterwards, as I started working with Swedish companies and came in contact with Swedish people, even married a Swedish person later, I always remembered this moment in the interactions where I was comparing my culture with the Swedish culture. Every time it held true. And I said, wow, in that moment of just looking at these two expressions, I found the, one fundamental difference that would tell me where is it that somebody like me who's a maverick fits better, even if I'm not from that country. And I think that just shows that, 22, 23 years later, I'm sitting in Sweden, I work with Swedish companies, I speak Swedish, etc. So for me, that was a watermark moment that left an impression and really changed the course of my life to becoming more and more Sweden, and now even living in Sweden.
Okay, thank you. So
sometimes watermark moments can come in very common ways. Yeah.
Okay, so moving from, we're coming from India over to Sweden, and Sweden, are you going to go somewhere else now, or is there something that's popping up in your head?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about which people have made most impression in my life, and for me, I'm very hard to impress. In a short, I sound very negative today, but I'm not that negative actually. But I'm a positive skeptic, I used to say. And also there is also often you mention people that are famous. I know shadow of your encounter with the Dalai Lama, but you always mention, or not always, but often you mention a famous person, like a name tag he meant a lot. And we are, so many of us think it's so important to have idols, superstars and things, and many times we look up to them and spend a lot of time knowing about their life and the soap operas, and they make food and they sing and they do everything. I am not especially impressed with those famous people. They don't make any mark on me. And of course I have met some private also. Nothing special. But when I hear about a person that actually don't use his fame or her fame in that way, still shows humanity, and as he saw your flower. I heard a story about Anthony Hopkins. He's a very famous actor, and one of the big one in Hollywood. He was in a studio and should do a voiceover for a film. And all the executive came there, and because he's coming, and they put up the red carpet and everything. And he came in. He was polite. He's called Sir. I think he's
knighted.
Knight, yeah, he's from England. So anyhow, so he saw a bucket full of flowers standing on the table, and he said, "Oh, thank you very much, but these are nice flowers. Who put them?" "Oh, no, it's a secretary on the second floor. I would like to meet her," he said. "No, we don't have time. Time is money." "No, I would like to meet her." And they thought it was very not suitable. So they went up there, and he said, "Oh, is it you that puts these flowers?" And of course, she was a great fan of Anthony Hopkins, but she was not in the major executive, so she was not allowed to come when they came. And she was so happy, and he gave her that short moment of his attention, and that meant a lot. And that kind of persons that don't necessarily need to do such things for other people, but still does it. They are very impressive to listen to. And of course, I met one or two, but all my life have been looking for role models. But I rather look for a role model and then an idol, if you know what I mean. Rather a role model that I'm impressed with what they do and the way of thinking, not by their fame.
Thank you. We are getting close to a wrap-up of this very brief session. We've been touching a little bit on meaningful encounters, leaving watermarks for life, when we're full at and going full speed, fair winds, and how do we create space within that frame and structure for intention, to open up for the nothingness, something which is always there, and open up for the magic of things happening within the line of that intention. And also we talked a little bit about thereby building trustworthiness, and from, I put here, intention to attention. I think often when we're full speed we can get so caught up with life or whatever the process is. So how do we find the time then just to stop and see, hoy, that was that moment, catch those little moments. I think that when I was mentioning Dalai Lama, I've got several sort of stories around that where he just stops by because he wants to recognize, seeing something. Yesterday I went shopping and suddenly there was just a few seconds where I caught eye with this little child, and we just very briefly connected, only for a few 5-6 seconds, but there was that a brief meeting, and that made us both smile, and for me that was a meaningful encounter, because we just saw somebody else and that magic little moment happened. So I think from today's what I take with me today is how do we create that space for those magic little happenings, the moments, the magic little encounters. A little final word from either of you? If you have anything you want to add before we conclude this session? You don't have to, but if there's something, I really wanted to say this. No.
Not to say this, but I think, I will take the intention and attention and holding both together as my biggest takeaway from this session, and take that back into my life. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think you started up talking about meaning of life. You mentioned it a little. One of my favorite filmmakers is Wim Wenders, and I heard him talking about, before I was looking after the meaning of life, but it's very hard to find what is that, and maybe you don't know it until the end of the life, but on the road, the more important question now is, how shall I live? And that's the main question I have now.
How we shall live. Dear people who are joining us here now or later, we're coming to an end. In a little while we will actually have a follow-up on this session, where we're also going to talk about storytelling, existential health, and the meaning of life. How do we navigate towards a meaning of life in modern society, where we ideally should strive to be best for the world, not best in the world? This is Ship of a New Story, broadcasting from House of Stories. Lovely for having you all, and we say, ship ahoy!